I think one thing that is really great about playing video games is when you sort of stumble upon a smaller title that may have received good to decent reviews, but it didn't get that push from the industry to really make it stand out from the crowd, even though you totally think it deserves that attention. I see this a lot in the indie space, with there being many great games to experience, and sadly, the games media doesn't usually take the time to cover all of these games. They focus on all the big titles, and they seem to cherry pick the same smaller titles and all agree to cover those same games. We saw this with the release of Dead Cells. That was an indie that was covered by everyone, and while it was a fun game, I do think other titles deserve that same attention, if not more. And this causes there to be instances of gamers stumbling upon smaller titles that they didn't really hear about, and when they finally get to play those games, they have this awesome feeling like they just discovered a hidden gem. That same year, games like Legrand Legacy, Doorkicker's Action Squad, along with many other titles, showed great quality to the people that played them. Recently, I've been playing a title that I definitely think deserves more attention, especially with many gamers eagerly wanting a new Final Fantasy Tactics-like experience. And like I have said before, this is where the indie space can help fill in holes that are left by big companies that don't want to make those types of games anymore. Players would love to see a new Tactics game from Square Enix, but they don't seem interested in doing that right now. To their credit, they have been developing RPGs that are both in their modern style and older traditional style, but the Tactics games seem to not have received the same treatment. This is sort of like how Konami has roughly ignored how people have been asking for years for a new Castlevania-like experience. With Konami not making a new game, this resulted in having a talented indie studio taking that opportunity to give what the fans have been asking for. And when that game released, people were very happy with the end result. While it is frustrating to see a company turn its back on a series or the type of game that they used to make, I think these situations also make way for great introductions for other studios to come in and then fill in that gap and shine. As many of my viewers know, I cover a wide variety of games with a focus on indie and underrated titles, and today I have an awesome game I want to discuss with you. Fell Seal has completely captured my attention with its quality. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review for Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark. Fell Seal is an engaging RPG tactics game, and it's a lot of fun. This game is so much fun. I was continually impressed with it my whole way through. I was eager to try it out once I heard about it. I was on a flight back home and I had just downloaded the game. So this was a great opportunity to just play the game and focus on it without any distractions. I immediately found myself absorbed by the world, story, the progression systems, and especially the gameplay. As I continued to play the game, I kept saying I couldn't believe that more people were not talking about this title. This is a worthy spiritual successor to the tactics games, and it's done so well here. Like I mentioned before, the media only cherry picks a few indie games to give that spotlight to, but this one definitely deserves that attention completely. Usually when I do a review, I wait till the very end to give my verdict on the game, and while I have given my verdict early before, I see no reason to make you guys wait till the end for this one. Fell Seal is easily one of the best games I've played this year, and I utterly love my time with it. The combat is really engaging. At the start of each fight, you are given a brief view of the battlefield, and then you have to place your units on the field. You can only place a limited number of units on the field, so you need to give some thought into the strategy for that fight. Once your units are on the field, you will then take your turn choosing to move, attack, use a spell, an item, or other options. The fights are really engaging and can be pretty tough when you first start out. I would highly suggest grinding out the first area so that you can get some level ups and skills under your belt. While on the battlefield, there is a lot to consider. When attacking, there is an accuracy rating right next to the amount of damage that you will potentially do. I found the accuracy rating to mostly make sense, but there are plenty of instances where I had a very high accuracy rating, but my attack would still miss. This is really my only flaw with the game, in that I would have situations where I would have a rating above 90% and my attack would still miss. This is really frustrating when it pops up, and I don't know if this can be finely tuned in a future patch, but I hope they do. Early on, you will need to be concerned with the placement of your allies when next to enemies, especially if you decide to use a spell on your enemies. If your allies are in range, you could do damage to a friend when you're targeting an enemy. This also results in situations where you may need to heal several allies so they do not die, but that healing move will also heal a nearby enemy. Elevation is another thing that comes into fights and something that you need to consider. It can give you an advantage if you're up high, and certain character classes will take longer to travel upwards. But you also need to consider your positioning when you're on a ledge, as many moves can knock you off that will damage you a lot or outright kill one of your characters. Thankfully, dead characters can be revived within battle, so they aren't permanently gone, but characters that fall in battle are injured and some of their stats are reduced until they recover. The fights will involve different objectives to keep things interesting. In many cases, you will need to defeat all the enemies on the battlefield, while there are other instances where you need to defend an AI character. There are harder levels where you need to go to a set location on the map as quickly as possible. In these situations, enemies will continually spawn and you will find yourself quickly outnumbered. I really like these levels since it shifted the focus from figuring out how to defeat everyone, but rather trying to figure out the most efficient way to get to the set location before you're overwhelmed. Some battles keep things interesting by having additional enemies spawn in during the fight. This means you will need to change up your strategy on the fly and contend with those new foes. Another thing you will need to learn is how different attacks affect the battlefield differently. Some ranged weapons can hit you from really far away, some magic abilities will also affect a wider area, and some melee attacks can hit you from an angle rather than just from your front or your side. The game is pretty easy to initially understand, but to become more efficient at it, you will need to spend some time learning the ins and outs of your allies and your enemies. This is where the learning curve comes into play, but at the same time, you feel like you're becoming a more competent leader of your group as you get better at the game. I thoroughly love the combat system. I did find myself struggling a bit for my first few hours, but a lot of this is to be expected as I was learning the ins and outs of all these mechanics. And while I lost many of my early battles, I very much love the satisfaction I would get from outthinking my opponent. Behind the awesome combat are the addictive progression systems. When you successfully attack an enemy, you will gain experience points. Once you have 100 experience points, your character will automatically level up. When you are victorious in battles, you will gain points that you can use to then unlock new skills. There are a large amount of classes to choose from for your characters. You have several different magic users, ones that focus on buffing the team, range fighters, close range fighters, and many others. There's so many to choose from. As you gain points from successful battles, you can then earn different active and passive skills for your classes. Once you obtain all your skills for a class, you will then earn a permanent stat bonus for doing so. This actively encourages you to try and level up the different classes to better your soldiers. When you switch a character class, you will then have a new array of skills to then earn, and you can also keep a set of custom skills with you as you transition from different classes. You can select 2 passive skills from any class that you have earned, along with a counter skill and an ability skill set. This means you can make fun combinations between different character classes. This is where the awesome customization comes into play along with my addiction. Also, early on, as you level up a class, you will unlock new classes, and this will continually happen throughout the game. And with each new class, they provided more benefits to your characters. I spent hours just grinding out the different classes for my characters to get those stat bonuses along with different movesets. This combined with the excellent battle system makes this game fantastic.
In the dark days of centuries past, an otherworldly beast known as the Maw appeared in Tiora, leaving ruin in its wake. In this time of need, 7 great heroes rose against the threat. The battle was fierce, but the heroes prevailed, and the beast was vanquished. In slaying the beast, the heroes gained the power of immortality.
While the combat and progression systems are really what hooked me, I was surprised with how good the story is. Without getting into any specifics, I really enjoyed the cast of characters. The world and story is really interesting. What I really liked about the story were the smaller moments that you would encounter on the road. Many of these are optional, but it allows you to get further information on something that was mentioned in the main story, along with some humorous bits. You find out about older tensions between characters and then coming to terms with that. There's elements of leadership and forgiveness thrown in there as well. There are many elements about the story that are familiar, but I found this as a pleasant surprise since initially I wasn't expecting much from the story, and then I quickly got invested in it. Lastly, the presentation is another area that I enjoyed. The simple look to the game is charming, and the soundtrack for the battles is extremely engaging. Here are a few tracks from the game. Fell Seal is easily one of my favorite indies to come out this year. I love pretty much everything about it. The combat system requires you to think a few moves ahead, along with considering the many different factors of each of the levels. The massive amount of different character classes means that there's a lot to unlock and earn, while having a lot of personal customization for your characters. The story surprised me in how I found myself getting invested in it, and I really enjoyed the soundtrack. I didn't encounter many flaws other than the bit that I had with the accuracy rating really throwing off some of my attacks. If you have been wanting a new tactics-like game, then this is for you. I highly recommend you play this excellent game.